This is a completely true story, and it happened to me. I buried my husband after a boat explosion. 1 year later, I saw him alive at a charity auction. He was holding another woman's hand. A little girl called him Dad. When I whispered, "Ryan?" he looked at me and said, "You must have me confused with someone else." But dead men don't wear the watch their wife gave them.
1 year after I buried my husband, I went to Savannah, Georgia, wearing the same black dress I had worn to 3 sympathy dinners and 2 board meetings, where people still lowered their voices around me. My name is Mia Anderson. I was 51 years old, the widow of Ryan Anderson, and the co-owner of Anderson Coastal Logistics, the shipping company Ryan and I had built from one rented office near the Charleston docks. At least, that was what I believed my life was. The charity auction was being held inside an old historic hotel near Forsyth Park. Crystal chandeliers hung above polished floors. Waiters moved through the room with silver trays. Wealthy donors laughed too loudly over glasses of champagne, bidding on paintings, vacation packages, and antique jewelry they did not need. I had come only because the company had sponsored one of the auction tables. I planned to smile, shake a few hands, write one generous check, and leave before anyone could ask how I was really holding up. Then I heard the laugh. It came from across the ballroom, low and warm, with a slight break at the end. Ryan's laugh. For 1 second, the room disappeared. The lights, the music, the people, all of it faded beneath that impossible sound. My fingers tightened around my glass so hard I thought it might break. I turned slowly, and there he was. A man stood near the auction display, holding a catalogue in one hand and a glass of bourbon in the other. He had Ryan's broad shoulders, Ryan's silver-threaded dark hair, Ryan's strong jaw, and the small scar beneath his chin from the staircase fall he always joked about. But Ryan Anderson was dead. I had buried him after a boat explosion in Charleston Harbor. I had stood beside a closed casket while strangers told me the damage had been too terrible, that it was better if I remembered him as he had been. The man across the room was not alone. Beside him stood Claire Whitmore, a graceful woman in her mid-40s with soft auburn hair, pearl earrings, and the calm confidence of someone used to being admired. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, intimate and familiar. Next to them was a girl around 12 years old. She had long brown hair tied with a blue ribbon and bright, curious eyes. She looked up at him and said, "Dad, can we bid on the painting?" "My name is Ethan Walker," he said. "I don't know you." That was when I noticed the watch on his wrist. A silver watch with a black leather band. I had given it to Ryan on our 20th wedding anniversary. Inside the clasp, I had engraved 4 words: "Always find your way home." My knees almost gave out. Then a hand touched my elbow. It was Grace Miller, my former attorney and once my closest friend. Grace was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, elegant, and impossible to fool. Her silver blonde hair was cut neatly at her jaw, and she wore a navy suit that made her look more like a judge than a guest. "Mia," she said quietly, "don't react. Just breathe." "He's alive," I whispered. Grace's eyes moved past me to the man calling himself Ethan Walker. Her expression changed. Not shock, recognition of danger. She slipped her phone from her clutch and pretended to check a message. But I saw what she was really doing. She was taking pictures. Ethan looked at us one last time, then placed his hand on Claire's back and guided her and the girl away through the crowd. I stood frozen beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by laughter, money, and music. 1 year ago, I had buried my husband. That night, I realized I might have buried a lie. I did not go back to my hotel after the auction. Grace followed me out through the side entrance, one hand still wrapped around my elbow, as if she thought I might collapse. Maybe I would have, if Ethan Walker had not been walking 20 steps ahead of us with Claire Whitmore and the little girl, Lily. I heard Claire say her name when the child tugged at Ethan's sleeve and asked if they could stop for ice cream on the way home. Ethan laughed softly and tapped the end of her nose with one finger. It was such a small gesture, so ordinary, so painfully familiar. Ryan used to do the same thing to me when he wanted to end an argument without apologizing. They crossed the valet lane and stopped beside a black Range Rover with tinted windows. Ethan opened Claire's door first, then helped Lily climb into the back seat. A careful man. A practiced man. A man who had spent years pretending kindness was the same thing as loyalty. "Plate number," Grace whispered. I was already staring at it. She typed it into her phone while I repeated it under my breath, afraid the digits would vanish if I blinked. Ethan glanced once across the parking lot. I stepped behind a stone column, my heart hammering against my ribs. For one terrible second, I thought he had seen me. But he only adjusted his cufflinks, the same way Ryan always did when he was nervous. After the SUV pulled away, Grace and I sat in my rental car under the yellow glow of a street lamp. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Grace looked at me and said, "Mia, I need you to understand something. If that man is Ryan, then this is bigger than an affair." "I know," I said. But I did not know. Not yet. I only knew that the dead man I had mourned had just driven away with another woman and a child who called him Dad. Grace made 3 phone calls that night. She still had friends in places where information moved quietly. By midnight, she had a name, an address, and a thin public record. Ethan Walker, 54 years old, business consultant, Savannah resident, property owner, taxpayer, clean credit, no criminal history, no visible connection to Ryan Anderson. On paper, he looked real. Too real, but Grace kept scrolling, her mouth tightening. "What?" I asked. "This record doesn't go back far enough," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means Ethan Walker seems to have appeared about 14 months ago." 14 months. Ryan's boat exploded 12 months ago. A cold line moved down my spine. Back at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed and studied the pictures Grace had taken. Ethan's face in profile. Ethan's hand on Claire's back. Ethan's wrist as he lifted his glass. The watch was there. The watch was proof enough for my heart, but not for the world. Then my phone rang. It was my younger sister, Natalie Carter. Natalie was 46, soft-spoken, pretty in a tired way, with warm brown eyes and a habit of worrying before anyone gave her a reason. After Ryan's death, she had stayed with me for 2 weeks, cooking meals I barely touched and answering calls I could not face. "Mia," she said quickly, "Grace texted me that you were upset. What happened?" I hesitated. "I saw Ryan tonight." Silence. Not confusion. Not immediate concern. Silence. Then Natalie exhaled too hard. "Mia, please don't do this to yourself." "Don't do what?" "Turn grief into ghosts." He was wearing the anniversary watch. "Mia." And he called himself Ethan Walker. Another silence. This one was worse. When Natalie spoke again, her voice was careful. Too careful. "You need to come home. Stop digging before you hurt yourself." I stared at the dark hotel window.
seeing my own reflection instead of the city lights. "Before I hurt myself," I said slowly. "Or before I find something." Natalie did not answer right away. That was the moment I realized Ethan Walker was not the only person pretending. And my husband's new name was only the first lie.
The next afternoon, I rented a plain grey sedan instead of using my own car. Grace told me not to follow Ethan again without a plan, but I could not sit in a hotel room and stare at the ceiling while the man wearing my husband's face lived another life 30 minutes away. The address Grace found led me toward the Savannah River, past moss-covered oak trees and quiet streets where the houses grew larger, older, and farther apart. When I finally saw the black Range Rover parked near a wrought iron gate, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. The house stood beyond a curved driveway, white with dark green shutters, wrapped in a wide porch that faced the river. It was not the kind of home a man bought after starting over. It looked established, expensive, permanent. A carved wooden sign near the mailbox read, "Walker Family." I took a picture, then another, forcing my hands to stay steady. If Ethan Walker had only existed for 14 months, then someone had built this life for him long before the world buried Ryan Anderson. I parked farther down the road beneath a low-hanging oak and waited. At dusk, the front door opened. Claire stepped onto the porch first, wearing a pale blue dress and carrying a bowl covered with a linen towel. She looked relaxed, unguarded, like a woman who had no reason to question the man inside her home. Then Lily ran out behind her, laughing, her brown hair loose over her shoulders. Around her neck was a small gold necklace. When she turned toward the light, I saw the initials on the pendant. R.A. A moment later, Ethan came outside. He placed both hands on Lily's shoulders, leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Then he pulled Claire close and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was not dramatic. It was worse than that. It was routine. They sat together at a table on the porch, passing plates, eating dinner as the river turned orange behind them. I watched the man I had mourned pour sweet tea for another woman like he had not left ashes behind in Charleston. A neighbour walked past with a small white dog and stopped near the fence. Claire greeted her warmly. I lowered my window just enough to hear pieces of their conversation. The neighbour asked about Ethan. Claire smiled and said he was doing better now, that losing his first wife in an accident had nearly destroyed him, but Savannah had helped him heal. I almost laughed. His first wife, his accident, his healing. Ryan had turned my grief into a story he could use to make himself look wounded. My phone began buzzing on the passenger seat. Natalie. I ignored it. It rang again, then again. Finally, I answered without taking my eyes off the porch. "Where are you?" she asked too quickly. I said nothing. "Mia, please tell me you didn't go back there." My stomach tightened. I had not told her where there was. Across the lawn, Ethan suddenly looked toward the road, as if some instinct had warned him the past was watching. I ended the call, took one last photo of the house, the porch, the car, and Lily's necklace, then drove away before anyone could see my face. I drove back to Charleston before sunrise, leaving Savannah behind like a crime scene I was not ready to touch with both hands. The closer I got to the harbour, the heavier my chest became. Anderson Coastal Logistics stood near the water, a 3-story brick building Ryan and I had once been proud to call ours. I had helped build that company from nothing. Late invoices, sleepless nights, cheap coffee, and one rented office that smelled like salt and old paper. After Ryan's death, the company attorney had told me everything was settled properly. I had believed him, because grief makes trust feel easier than questions. That morning, I went straight to Ryan's old office. His nameplate was still on the desk because I had never found the strength to remove it. The room smelled faintly of leather, dust, and the cedar cologne he used to wear. I opened the filing cabinets first, then the locked drawers, then the archive boxes stacked behind the conference room. At first, everything looked normal. Vendor contracts, insurance renewals, shipping permits, payroll records. But normal, I was learning, was just another word for a lie that had been arranged neatly. The first strange transfer was dated 3 weeks before the boat explosion. Then another. Then 5 more. Large payments had been moved out of the company's reserve account into consulting firms I had never approved. One name appeared again and again. Low Country Strategic Holdings, LLC. I searched the folder Grace had sent me and found the connection buried beneath 2 layers of paperwork. Low Country Strategic Holdings was tied to a mailing address in Savannah, the same district where Ethan Walker lived. My hands went cold as I printed every page. Then I found the contracts with my signature. At least, they were supposed to be my signature. The letters looked close enough to fool someone who had never watched me sign my name 1,000 times. But the curve of the M was wrong. The pressure was too heavy. The final stroke in Anderson lifted upward when mine always fell down. These documents authorized the sale of 2 company storage lots and 1 dockside warehouse. Assets Ryan and I had spent decades paying off had been sold without my knowledge, as if I had signed away pieces of my own life while mourning him. By noon, I was sitting alone in the records room when my office phone rang. No one used that line anymore. I picked it up slowly. A man's voice said, "Mrs. Anderson, this is Harold Bennett." Harold had been our senior accountant for 16 years, a thin, careful man in his late 60s with wire-framed glasses and a quiet voice that made people underestimate him. Ryan had told me Harold retired early because of health problems. Harold now told me that was a lie. "I was forced out," he said. 2 months before the accident, I found transfers I could not explain. Harold asked to meet in the parking lot of an old seafood diner near the docks. When he arrived, he looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slightly bent, but his eyes sharp with fear and purpose. He handed me a small black external drive wrapped in a napkin. "Before they locked me out, I copied what I could," he said. "Deleted ledgers, internal emails, payment schedules. I kept it because I knew someday someone would need proof." I looked down at the drive in my hand and finally understood the shape of the thing Ryan had built. This was not an affair. It was not a second life born from weakness. It was theft. It was planning. It was a takeover hidden inside a funeral. I did not call Natalie first. I drove to her house with Harold Bennett's black external drive in my purse and copies of the forged contracts on the passenger seat. My sister lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Charleston, in a small, cream-colored house with flower boxes under the windows. From the outside, it looked peaceful. But when she opened the door and saw my face, all the color drained from hers. Natalie Carter, my younger sister, was 46, gentle-looking, with tired brown eyes and shoulder-length chestnut hair she always tucked behind one ear when she was nervous. That morning, both of her hands were shaking. I walked past her into the living room without waiting for an invitation. "How did you know I went back to Savannah?" I asked. Natalie closed the door slowly. "Grace told me you were upset. Grace didn't know where I was when you called." Her lips parted, but no answer came out. I placed the photos on her coffee table one by one. Ethan at the auction, Ethan beside Claire, Ethan outside the river house, Lily wearing the necklace with R.A. engraved on it. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Is this Ryan?" Natalie stared at the pictures for a long time. At first, she shook her head. "No, Mia, I don't know." Maybe he just looks like him. Then I laid down the contract with my forged signature. Her breath caught. "You signed as a witness on this one," I said. "Don't tell me you don't know anything." That was when her face broke. She covered her mouth with both hands and began to cry, not softly, but like someone whose guilt had been waiting in her throat for a year. "He came to me before the explosion," she whispered. "Ryan said everything was falling apart. He said there were debts, lawsuits, people trying to take the company from you." I stood completely still. Natalie wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. "He told me if you found out, you would lose the house, the company, your reputation, everything. He said he had a plan to protect the family, but you could never know because you would panic and stop him." I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to listen. Natalie said Ryan brought her papers after the accident, telling her they were emergency documents to protect company assets while I was grieving. He said I had already approved them verbally. He said all she had to do was sign as a family witness, and in 2 cases, copy my signature from an old holiday card because the bank needed matching authorization. She had believed him. Or maybe she had chosen to believe him because the truth would have required courage. "You helped him steal from me," I said. Natalie flinched as if I had slapped her. "I didn't know that was what I was doing." "But you knew enough to be afraid." She lowered her eyes. "Yes." The room went silent except for the ticking of a clock on her wall. Then Natalie looked up and said, "There's something else." She told me Ryan had kept a private safe inside his old harbour office, hidden behind a removable panel under the built-in bookcase. She had seen him open it once. Inside were passports, insurance papers, and a folder marked with the name of an offshore bank. "I think he moved more money than anyone knows," she said. "And I think the proof is still there." I gathered the photos and papers from the table. Natalie reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "Mia, please, let me help fix this." I looked at my sister, at the woman who had comforted me after the funeral while carrying part of the lie in her chest. "You don't get forgiveness today," I said. "You get a choice. Keep protecting him, or help me bring him down." For the first time, Natalie did not look away. "I'll help you," she said. And that was the first honest thing she had given me in a year. The next morning, I hired Grace Miller officially as my attorney. Not as an old friend, not as someone quietly taking pictures in a ballroom, but as the woman who would stand between me and whatever Ryan had built in the dark. Grace set up a private meeting in her office overlooking Charleston Harbour. Harold Bennett came too, carrying a battered leather briefcase and looking like a man who had waited far too long to tell the truth. Natalie sat beside me, pale and silent, her guilt pressed into every line of her face. For 6 hours, we worked through Harold's external drive. The deleted files were worse than I expected. There were payment trails, scanned IDs, insurance drafts, wire transfers, and emails written in careful language that never said fake death, but meant exactly that. Ethan Walker had not appeared out of nowhere. Ryan had built him slowly, years earlier, using shell companies, altered tax records, and a private mailbox in Savannah. By the time the boat exploded, Ethan Walker already had bank accounts, property links, and enough paperwork to look real to anyone who did not know where to dig. Then Harold found the file that made the room go completely still. It was labelled Marine Loss Report, but inside were hospital documents, insurance notes, and a death certificate connected to a man named Caleb Price. Caleb had been homeless, terminally ill, and alone, except for a distant niece in Alabama. The records showed payments made to that niece before and after the explosion. Ryan had not simply disappeared. Someone else had died in his place, and I had mourned over a coffin holding a man I had never met. Grace's face hardened as she printed the documents. "This is enough to freeze assets," she said. "Not all of them yet, but enough to stop him from moving money once he knows you're coming." She began preparing emergency filings while Harold called an old federal contact from the hallway. I heard only pieces of the conversation: wire fraud, identity fraud, insurance fraud, possible staged death. When Harold returned, he nodded once. "The FBI will take the drive," he said, quietly for now. For the first time, I felt the truth leaving my hands and entering the world. Natalie's part came that evening. Ryan called her from a blocked number, just as Grace predicted he might. Natalie wore a small recording device beneath her sweater, her hands trembling as she answered. Ryan's voice came through cold and low. He told her to keep me away from Savannah. He said if I kept digging, Claire and Lily would suffer, and Natalie would go down with him. Natalie looked at me across the room, tears in her eyes, but she did not break. She asked him what he wanted her to hide, and Ryan, arrogant enough to believe fear still worked, said too much. Later that night, Grace received a message from Claire Whitmore. Claire had found an old hidden email account on Ethan's tablet. Inside were photos of me and Ryan from our wedding, anniversary trips, and company events. Claire's message was short. "Who is Mia Anderson, and why is my husband keeping her pictures?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Claire was no longer just part of Ryan's lie. She was becoming another witness to it. I did not call the police myself, not yet. Grace had the filings ready. Harold had delivered the drive. Natalie's recording was secured. Claire had begun asking the questions Ryan feared most. All that remained was to make him step into the open. I bought a prepaid phone from a gas station near the harbour, typed one message, and sent it to the number Grace had traced to Ethan Walker. "I know who you are. Meet me at Charleston Harbour if you want to protect Claire and Lily from the truth." Then I turned off the phone and watched the water move beneath the moonlight. The trap had been set. Ryan came to Charleston Harbour at sunset, just as I knew he would. The sky was burning orange over the water, and the dock lights were beginning to flicker on one by one. A year ago, this was the place where everyone told me my husband had been taken from me. Now I stood on the same dock, no black dress, no trembling hands, no tears. Just me, the wind, and the truth waiting to be spoken out loud. Grace stood a few feet behind me, calm and sharp in a grey coat, holding a folder thick enough to ruin a life. Natalie stood beside her, pale but steady, no longer hiding behind fear. Farther away, near an unmarked van, 2 federal agents watched without moving. I did not look at them often. I did not need to. Their presence was enough to remind me this was no longer just my heartbreak. It was a case. Ryan arrived in a dark sedan, not the Range Rover from Savannah. He stepped out slowly, wearing a navy jacket and the face of a man who still believed he could talk his way out of anything. For a moment, he stared at me as if I were the ghost. Then he smiled sadly, the same smile he used for years whenever he wanted me to doubt myself. "Mia," he said, "you need help." I almost laughed. He took a step closer. "You're grieving. You saw someone who looked like me, and your mind filled in the rest." "You mean Ethan Walker?" I asked. His smile tightened. "I don't know what you think you found," he said, "but you're embarrassing yourself." Grace stepped forward and handed me the folder. I opened it slowly. First, I showed him the photograph from the auction, his hand, his watch, Claire beside him. Then the property documents for the Savannah house. Then the banking records under Ethan Walker's name. Then the insurance reports tied to Caleb Price. Finally, I played Natalie's recording on my phone. Ryan's own voice filled the dock. "Keep Mia away from Savannah. If she keeps digging, everything comes down." The colour drained from his face. Natalie began.
"No," she whispered. "You made me part of your crime."
Before he could answer, another car pulled into the lot. Claire stepped out, holding Lily's hand. Grace had contacted her that morning, but seeing her there still changed the air around us. Claire Whitmore looked different without the calm smile I had seen in Savannah. Her auburn hair was pulled back, her face pale, her eyes full of humiliation and rage she refused to spend carelessly. Lily stood behind her mother, small and frightened, clutching the gold necklace with the RA initials against her chest. She was only a child, too young to understand all the crimes, but old enough to know the man she trusted had lied. Ryan looked at Claire, then at me, and something inside him finally collapsed. "Claire," he said, "I can explain." Claire walked toward him slowly. She did not scream. She did not slap him. She simply removed the ring from her finger and placed it on the dock between them. "You told me your wife died," she said. "You told my daughter we were your second chance." Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came. Claire's voice stayed quiet. "You didn't lose your family because of the truth. You lost it because of the lies." That was when Ryan fell to his knees. Not from guilt, not from love, from fear. "Mia," he begged, turning to me. "Please, after everything we had, after all those years." I looked down at the man I had mourned, the man I had loved, the man who had buried a stranger in his place and called it survival. "For a year," I said, "I cried for you." His eyes filled with tears. "But today," I continued, "I'm not here to mourn you. I'm here to end." The federal agents arrested Ryan on the dock before the sun had fully disappeared behind Charleston Harbor. He did not fight. He did not run. Men like Ryan only looked powerful when people still believed them. Once the truth stood in front of him with documents, witnesses, recordings, and 2 women he had betrayed, there was nowhere left to perform. One agent read his rights, while another placed him in handcuffs. Ryan looked at me once, silently begging for the version of me who would have protected him. That woman was gone. Within 48 hours, the name Ethan Walker began to collapse. The accounts attached to that identity were frozen. The Savannah house was placed under seizure review. The shell companies Ryan had hidden behind were traced back to stolen company money, forged authorizations, and insurance fraud. Grace moved fast, filing emergency motions to protect Anderson Coastal Logistics before Ryan's lawyers could move a single dollar. For the first time in a year, the law was not something happening around me. It was finally working for me. Natalie testified first. She stood in a federal office with shaking hands and told the truth about every paper she had signed, every lie Ryan had fed her, and every moment she chose fear over honesty. I did not forgive her that day, but I watched her choose the hard road when the easy one was still available. That mattered. Harold Bennett testified too. His deleted ledgers and copied files became the backbone of the case. The man Ryan had forced out returned to the company months later, not as a frightened former accountant, but as a respected financial advisor whose warnings had finally been proven right. Claire left Savannah before the house was seized. She sent me one letter, handwritten on cream paper. She thanked me for telling her the truth, even though it destroyed the life she thought she had. She said Lily had stopped wearing the necklace with the RA initials and had asked to use her mother's last name again. I folded the letter and kept it in my desk. Claire and I were not friends, but we were survivors of the same lie, and that was its own kind of understanding. Ryan pleaded from jail more than once. Through attorneys, through letters, through messages passed by people who still thought marriage meant mercy. He said he was sorry. He said he had panicked. He said he loved me in the only way he knew how. I did not answer. The hardest punishment for Ryan was not losing the money, the houses, or the false name. It was realizing that not one person left in his life believed him anymore. The court returned legal control of Anderson Coastal Logistics to me. The stolen assets were recovered where possible. The Savannah property was seized. The insurance money became evidence. I sold the old Charleston house because too many rooms still remembered the woman I used to be. With part of the recovered money, I created the Anderson Trust for Financial Justice, a fund to help older women trapped in marriages filled with fraud, silence, and fear. I never held a second funeral for Ryan. The husband I loved had died long before the agents put him in handcuffs. He died the day he decided my loyalty made me easy to erase. Months later, I stood on the deck of a new company vessel as the sun rose over Charleston Harbour. The water was gold. The city was waking. Behind me was the company I had saved. Ahead of me was a life no one else controlled. For the first time in a year, I did not feel abandoned. I felt returned to myself. Mia lost the man she thought she loved, but in the end, she found something stronger: herself. Some people will say she was right to expose Ryan and take everything back. Others may feel that Natalie deserved a second chance because she was also trapped by his lies. And Claire, she was another woman caught in the middle of a life built on deception. This story leaves one question behind. When love turns into betrayal, is forgiveness still possible? Or is walking away the only way to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful family stories.